Want to up your negotiation game? Today, we're going deep on Never Split the Difference, the book by Voss.
Oh, this one's good.
He was the FBI's lead international kidnapping negotiator.
Yeah.
So this isn't theoretical stuff.
Exactly, and what Voss does so well is he throws out the old win-win stuff. You know, the textbook approach.
Right, the kind of negotiation advice that sounds good, but doesn't always work in the real world.
It's all about emotional intelligence and using, well, almost a little bit of persuasion.
Yeah, he kind of throws us right into the deep end, too.
How so?
Well, Voss gets invited to teach at Harvard Law.
Fancy.
Right, he thinks he's the expert.
Of course.
But the professors, they had other plans.
They did.
They set up this whole mock kidnapping thing.
No way.
Yeah, they tell him his son is being held hostage, ransom demand, the whole works.
Oh, wow. To show him that traditional negotiation tactics, they just don't cut it in those high-pressure emotional situations.
Yeah.
Real-world negotiations, they're driven by emotion, not just logic.
It's so true. Like, even something as simple as buying a car.
Yeah.
You might go in with your budget, your list of features, the practical stuff.
Right.
But at the end of the day, your decision is influenced by how the salesperson makes you feel.
Makes total sense.
And Voss highlights this, actually, with a story about training Harvard law students in hostage negotiation.
Okay.
The students, all their textbook knowledge, they relied on logic.
I see.
Whereas the FBI agents, they'd been in real-life crises.
They knew
they needed psychological tools to succeed.
Oh, that's fascinating.
And this kind of leads us to a major moment in FBI history.
Oh.
The Downs v. United States case from the 70s.
Okay.
It involved this botched hijacking, where the FBI's traditional approach,
It didn't work.
it led to a tragic outcome, actually.
Wow.
It was a real wake-up call for the Bureau.
Forcing them to rethink their whole approach to negotiation.
It really exposed the flaws of this getting to yes method.
The one that focuses on finding common ground. I mean, that works great in theory, but in real-world, high-stakes situations.
Doesn't always work.
Right. It often fails to account for emotions.
So instead of trying to get to yes, Voss advocates for what he calls tactical empathy.
Okay, interesting.
It's not about being nice or giving in, but about understanding the other person's emotions and using that
strategically
to your advantage.
So it's strategic empathy.
And he illustrates this with this incredible story from his early days in the FBI.
Let's hear it.
He was facing down 3 armed fugitives holed up in an apartment in Harlem.
Oh, wow.
No phone line, just a door separating them.
Tense.
He had to rely on his voice alone to de-escalate the situation.
Wow. So what did he do?
He used what he calls his late-night FM DJ voice.
A late-night FM DJ voice.
It's this calm, soothing tone that projected control and understanding.
It's fascinating how just by changing his tone of voice, he was able to influence the situation.
It's the opposite of yelling at someone to calm down, which never works.
Right.
Voss's approach is all about creating a sense of what he calls neural resonance.
Neural resonance.
Which is basically mirroring the other person's behavior and emotions to build rapport.
So you're syncing up with them on a subconscious level.
Pretty much.
And this leads to another technique he talks about. Labeling.
Labeling?
Yeah, explicitly acknowledging the other person's emotions.
Okay.
Like in the Harlem standoff, Voss said something like, "It looks like you're afraid."
Wouldn't that just confirm their fear, make things worse?
It's actually the opposite. Labeling someone's emotions often has a calming effect.
Interesting.
It shows them that you understand what they're going through, even if you don't agree with their actions.
So you're validating their feelings,
Yeah.
and that helps de-escalate the situation.
Exactly.
Okay. But some people might be thinking, this is all great for hostage takers, but how does it apply to everyday negotiations?
That's where it gets interesting.
Yeah.
Voss argues these techniques are just as effective in everyday situations.
Like
negotiating a salary, buying a car, even getting your kids to clean their rooms.
I'm starting to see how this could be useful.
Right.
Like acknowledging someone's emotions instead of dismissing them.
It can help defuse tension, move the conversation forward.
Again, empathy doesn't mean agreeing with the other person.
It's about understanding their perspective and using that understanding strategically.
So it's about being strategic with your empathy.
Exactly. And that takes us to chapter 3, where Voss dives deeper into labeling and introduces this concept of accusation audits.
Accusation audits. That sounds kind of aggressive.
I know, right? But it's actually a brilliant way to preemptively address the negative things the other person might be thinking about you or your offer.
So you're calling them out before they can call you out.
In a way, yes, but it's not about being confrontational.
Okay.
It's about acknowledging the elephant in the room and creating a more transparent and trusting environment.
I'm not sure I follow.
Okay, well, Voss shares a story about how he uses accusation audits to get more students to sign up for his hostage negotiation class.
That class might be a tough sell for some students.
You're telling me. It's demanding, and some might be intimidated by the whole thing.
So what does he do?
He starts by listing all the worst things students might be thinking about the class, that it's too stressful, too much time, or just plain scary.
So he's addressing their fears head on.
Exactly, and by doing so, he takes away their power.
Interesting.
It's like you're disarming them by acknowledging their potential objections before they even say them.
This accusation audit thing is fascinating.
It is.
It's like you're saying, look, I get it. You might have some concerns, so let's just address them.
Exactly. Voss gives another example of how this works in business.
Yeah.
He had a student facing a tough negotiation, major client. The relationship had soured.
Oh, that's rough.
Lots of potential accusations flying around, so Voss had her make a list of all the worst things the client could say.
About her and the company.
And then practice addressing those accusations head on.
That must have been uncomfortable.
A little, but during the negotiation, she was able to proactively address the negative perceptions.
Interesting.
And it helped to create a more open environment.
So she acknowledged the client's concerns and steered the conversation in a more positive direction.
Exactly. And guess what? She saved her company $1 million.
Wow, that's amazing.
Right. It shows that addressing those negative dynamics head on can actually lead to a more positive outcome.
This is great stuff.
It is.
But it takes self-awareness and emotional intelligence to use it effectively.
Absolutely.
Now, Chapter 4, Voss throws us another curveball. He challenges our obsession with the word yes in negotiations.
Really? We're so conditioned to think that yes is the goal?
I know, right? But he argues that embracing no can actually be much more powerful.
That's interesting.
I know. I've always been taught that yes is what you're aiming for.
So why would no be more valuable?
Well, think about it. When someone says yes too quickly, it can be a superficial agreement.
They might be saying yes just to please you or avoid conflict.
Or they're not truly committed to the outcome.
Exactly, and that's where no comes in.
Okay.
When someone says no, it's often a sign that they're genuinely engaged.
They're actually thinking about it.
They might want to clarify their needs or concerns.
So no can be a starting point for a more productive negotiation.
Exactly. Voss even says that hearing no can sometimes be more valuable than a quick yes.
Really?
He shares a story from his time working at a suicide hotline,
Wow.
where he learned that getting to know was crucial for certain callers.
How so?
For some, saying no to suicide was a way of taking back control, affirming their desire to live.
I see, like saying no to one option opens up the possibility of choosing another.
Exactly, and that applies to negotiation too.
Okay.
When you embrace no and you're not afraid of rejection, you create space for honest dialogue.
Makes sense.
And he has a great example from the FBI.
Let's hear it.
His colleague, Marty Evelsizer, was about to be unfairly fired.
Oh.
And instead of pleading her case or getting defensive, she used a series of no responses to turn the situation around.
How'd she do that?
She basically led her boss down a path where he had to either fire her unjustly or admit he was wrong.
So she used no to force him to confront the truth.
Exactly. And he admitted he was wrong, and Marty kept her job.
That's amazing.
It really shows how embracing no can empower you.
Voss also brings up Mark Cuban.
The billionaire entrepreneur.
Yeah, who famously said, every no gets me closer to a yes.
That's a great quote.
So it's about resilience and a willingness to hear no.
Absolutely.
If you're not afraid of rejection, you're more likely to ask for what you truly want and reach a better agreement.
It's about seeing no as a tool rather than an obstacle.
Exactly.
And he gives a practical tip for using no to your advantage.
Okay, I'm listening.
If someone's ignoring you or stalling, send a one-sentence email.
What does it say?
Have you given up on this project?
Wow, that's direct.
It is, but it's designed to get a no and get the conversation going again.
So you're forcing them to define their position.
Exactly. It's a way to break through the silence.
This whole embracing no thing is fascinating.
Right. It's a real mindset shift.
Now, Chapter 5, Voss takes us back to hostage negotiation
Always a good time.
with the story of Jeffrey Schilling's kidnapping by the Abu Sayyaf group.
Oh, wow. That was a high-profile case.
It really shows how important it is to understand the psychology of your counterpart.
Especially in a high-pressure situation.
The kidnapper in this case, Abu Sabaya, was a complex and dangerous guy.
Notorious.
How do you even begin to negotiate with someone like that?
Well, they had to navigate his personality while also trying to establish communication.
It was a delicate dance.
Definitely. And Voss introduces this model developed by the FBI called the Behavioral Change Stairway Model.
BCSM.
Yeah, which emphasizes that just getting a yes isn't enough.
It's about getting them to actually follow through.
Exactly. We've all met people who say yes to things they have no intention of doing.
Oh yeah, all the time.
Whether it's a New Year's resolution or a promise to change a habit, a yes is only meaningful if it leads to action.
Makes sense.
And in the Schilling case, getting a yes wasn't the goal.
Right.
They had to create a situation where Sabaya would not only agree to release Schilling, but actually do it.
So how did they do that?
That's where the two magic words come in.
That's right.
That's right. How can those two words be so powerful?
Voss explains that it signifies a deeper level of agreement than a simple yes.
It's about understanding and accepting the other person's point of view.
Exactly. And to get Sabaya to say, that's right, Voss used a combo of tactical empathy techniques, mirroring, labeling, summarizing back to him, to create a connection that helped to de-escalate the situation.
Amazing how powerful language can be.
It is, and Voss even uses these techniques with his own son, Brandon.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he was struggling as a football player, so Voss used mirroring and labeling to help Brandon identify his limiting beliefs.
Did it help?
It did. He ended up achieving success on the field. That's great. It shows these techniques aren't just for high-stakes situations.
They can be used in everyday life to help people overcome challenges.
Now, Voss also talks about a pharmaceutical sales rep who used these techniques with a skeptical doctor.
A classic challenge for salespeople.
So how'd she do it?
She started by actively listening, using labeling to acknowledge his hesitation.
So she showed empathy, built rapport.
Exactly. And then she used mirroring to reflect his concerns back to him.
She was trying to connect with him, not just sell him something.
Precisely. And it worked.
The doctor went from skeptic to champion.
Exactly.
It really shows how tactical empathy can be used to influence people.
And I think this is a good moment to pause.
Yeah.
Let our listeners reflect on what we've covered.
Think about a recent interaction where you were trying to convince someone of something.
How could you have used these techniques to get a better outcome?
Tactical empathy, ladling, mirroring.
They're surprisingly versatile.
Once you start using them, you'll be amazed at how much more effective you become at influencing people.
So take a minute to think about that.
And when we come back, we'll dive into Chapter 6, where Voss explores how to bend reality in a negotiation.
That's a good one.
It's going to be fascinating.
Can't wait.
All right, see you in a bit. Welcome back to our deep dive into Never Split the Difference.
This is where things get really interesting.
Bend reality, you say?
That's what Voss calls it.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
He uses this crazy story about a bank robbery in Harlem.
Oh man, those bank robbery stories, they always get me.
You and me both, and it really illustrates how do you influence someone's perception?
Right, because in a bank robbery, things can go south so fast.
And this one did. The FBI thought they had it under control.
Yeah.
But the lead robber, Chris Watts, he wasn't acting rationally.
So they needed a new approach.
That's where Voss's bending reality comes in.
Okay, so what does bending reality actually mean?
Well, it's like you're using psychology, right? You're framing the whole negotiation.
To kind of lead them down a path?
Exactly. So you can influence their perception of a situation and then ultimately their behavior.
So you're almost creating an illusion in a way.
You could say that.
Okay, so how do you do that?
Well, Voss talks about using the late-night FM DJ voice.
Oh, yeah, we talked about that earlier.
Right. It's all about that calm, that soothing tone.
The one that projects control and understanding.
You got it. And in this bank robbery standoff, it worked wonders. Voss, he used his calming voice to de-escalate Watts, who was just getting more and more agitated.
It's amazing what a change in tone of voice can do.
It really is. Think about it. It's almost like you're turning down the lights, you put on some relaxing music.
It sets the mood.
Exactly.
So, besides the voice, what else does Voss suggest?
Another good one is looking for those inconsistencies in their story.
Oh, you mean like when someone says one thing, but their actions say another?
Exactly. And then using mirroring to kind of gently point those inconsistencies out.
Okay, remind me about mirroring again.
Right, so mirroring, it's all about reflecting their words and behavior back to them.
It's supposed to build rapport.
Yeah, creates that connection.
Okay, but how do you use that to expose inconsistencies?
You got to use it strategically. Let's say someone tells you they're not interested in your product, right?
Yeah.
But then they start asking a bunch of questions about it.
So they're curious, but trying to play it cool.
Exactly. So you might say something like, I hear you're not interested, but you seem curious about the features.
Tell me more about what you're looking for. Something like that.
Bingo.
Oh.
You're mirroring their words back to them, which subtly forces them to confront the contradiction.
Clever. It's a way to call them out without actually calling them out.
You got it.
I like it. Voss also gives an example of how mirroring can clarify, like confusing instructions from a boss.
Oh, I've been there.
Haven't we all? He talks about this consultant who was just struggling to understand what her boss wanted.
So what did she do?
Mirroring. She mirrored the boss's words back to him. So she repeated his instructions back to him.
Yeah, and it helped her figure out where she needed more info.
That's great. It could save so much time and wasted effort.
I know, right?
Mirroring is pretty versatile.
Oh, yeah.
Now, Voss also throws in this concept of unbelief.
Ah, yes. Disbelief.
As in, like, not believing what the other person is saying.
Well, not exactly. It's more like recognizing that they usually come into the negotiation with some resistance.
Like they're skeptical.
Right. They're not quite ready to buy into what you're selling, literally or figuratively.
I can relate to that for sure.
And Voss's point is, instead of trying to force your perspective on them, chip away at that disbelief.
Okay, how do you do that?
Calibrated questions.
Ah, yes, those again?
You use those questions to subtly point out inconsistencies in their thinking.
So it's like you're planting seeds of doubt, letting them come to their own conclusions.
Exactly.
Pretty sneaky.
It's about being strategic.
Does he have an example for this one?
Of course. He talks about this doctor who used calibrated questions to convince a patient not to leave the hospital.
Oh, wow. Against medical advice.
That's the one.
So how did the doctor use unbelief to persuade the patient?
He didn't argue or try to force him to stay. Instead, he started asking questions. What's making you want to leave? What are you hoping will happen if you go home?
So he was trying to understand a patient's perspective first.
Right. Then, once he understood, he could gently challenge those assumptions.
Offer some alternatives.
And guess what? The patient stayed and got the care he needed.
It's amazing how you can influence behavior without being forceful.
It's all about that subtle approach. Chapter 6 is all about being flexible, adaptable, open to new info as it comes up.
That's so important in any negotiation, really.
Right. You have to read the room.
Okay, so we've got bending reality, the FMDJ voice, mirroring, and calibrated questions. What's next?
Well, in Chapter 7, Voss dives into calibrated questions even deeper.
Okay, bring it on.
He tells the story about a woman named Julie. Her husband was kidnapped in Ecuador.
Oh, man, that's rough.
It was, and she used these how questions to kind of stay in control.
How questions? What do those look like?
She asked things like, how do I know my husband is alive? Or how can we possibly raise that much money?
So it forces the kidnappers to respond, right?
Exactly. She's shaping the conversation.
And it worked.
It did. The kidnappers, they actually lowered their ransom demands.
Wow, just from those questions.
The power of a well-placed question. But get this, Julie's husband, he escaped.
He did.
Yeah, and during the debriefing, they realized something. Her how questions had made the kidnappers start arguing amongst themselves.
So they were so focused on answering her questions that they got distracted.
Exactly. It created an opening, and her husband got away.
That's incredible. It's like those questions accidentally helped him escape.
You could say that. It shows that calibrated questions, they don't just gather information. They can actually change the dynamics of the whole situation.
So it's like a secret weapon almost.
It can be. And Voss points out that this technique, it's especially good when you're dealing with someone who's trying to control things.
Because it forces them to explain themselves.
Exactly. And that can really throw them off balance.
Okay, so we've talked about mirroring for building rapport, but Voss also talks about the team aspect of negotiation.
Oh, yeah, even when you're dealing with just one person.
Right. He says you're often dealing with a whole team of influences.
Their boss, colleagues, family, even their own internal doubts.
So it's like there's a whole committee in their head.
Exactly. And if you can recognize that dynamic, you can start to figure out who the players are.
So it's like you're a detective, gathering clues.
You got it. He gives an example of this kidnapping in the Philippines, where the negotiators realized they weren't just dealing with the hostage taker, but also his family.
Wow, that's a whole other level.
Right, and they were influencing him behind the scenes.
So what's the takeaway there?
Well, you have to do your homework, right? Gather as much info as you can about the other side.
Okay, so Chapter 7 is all about those calibrated questions and how they can really shape the whole negotiation.
They can give you a huge advantage.
Now, Chapter 8, this is where Voss focuses on making sure you're getting real commitment.
Ah, yes, yes, that actually means something.
He tells the story about a guy named Alistair, kidnapped in the Philippines.
Another tough one.
It really shows how important it is to stay calm, even when you're terrified.
You can't let them see you sweat.
Exactly, and Voss says showing too much emotion can actually give the other side more leverage.
They can smell desperation a mile away.
Okay, so how do you avoid that?
Well, in this case, the guy negotiating, his name was Aaron, Voss coached him to use, you guessed it, how questions.
Those questions, again, they're like a magic spell or something.
They can be. In this case, they helped Aaron buy some time and, keep the kidnapper talking.
Okay, so while he was asking questions, what was happening?
The authorities were working to track the kidnapper down.
That makes sense. Did it work?
It did. They got Alistair back safe.
That's a relief.
Right. And Voss talks about this idea of the 3 types of yes: commitment, confirmation, and counterfeit.
Okay, break that down for me.
So remember we talked about how getting to yes isn't always enough.
Right.
Well, Voss says you want the commitment yes. That's the one where they're actually going to take action.
So it's not just lip service.
Exactly. But a lot of times people give you the other yeses just to get you off their back,
Like they're trying to keep the peace.
You got it.
Okay, so how do you know if you're getting a real yes or one of those fake ones?
Well, Voss uses this thing called the rule of 3.
Rule of 3, what's that?
You basically get them to agree to the same thing 3 times in the same conversation.
Ah, so if they're hesitant, you know something's up.
Exactly. And pay attention to their body language, too.
Like, are they making eye contact?
Exactly. Are they fidgeting? That kind of thing.
It's like you're reading their minds.
Well, kind of. Voss also goes into lie detection in this chapter.
Hold on, lie detection.
Yeah, he talks about how to spot when someone might be fibbing.
Wait, are you serious? We can learn to do that.
It's not about being a human lie detector, but Voss does give some tips.
Okay, all ears.
Liars, they tend to use a lot of words, more than they need to.
Okay, interesting. What else?
And they avoid personal pronouns. So instead of saying, I did this, they'll say, it was done.
Oh, that's sneaky.
It is. They might also fidget, avoid eye contact, or speak in a hesitant way.
Okay, so it's not foolproof, but it's like an extra layer of awareness.
Exactly.
It's about paying attention to those subtle cues.
And Voss says, look for clusters of these signs, not just one thing.
Makes sense. It's like putting together a puzzle. You need all the pieces.
Precisely.
This is fascinating, but I'm curious about one more thing. How do you use how questions as a polite way to say no?
Oh, that's a good one. Instead of saying no directly, which can be kind of confrontational, you ask a question like, how can I possibly do that? Or how would that be feasible?
So you're not shutting them down, but you're also not saying yes.
Exactly, and it forces them to think of alternatives.
Chapter 8 is a goldmine of information.
It really is.
It's all about control, gathering info, making sure they're really on board.
And of course, those how questions.
They really are the MVP of this book.
Yeah.
All right, so we've talked about tactical empathy, black swans, all this really interesting stuff.
It's heady stuff for sure.
But now, let's make it practical. How do we use all this in our everyday lives?
That's the beauty of Never Split the Difference. It's not just about hostage negotiations. It's about all those little negotiations we do every day without even realizing it.
Like what? Give me some examples.
I mean, think about deciding where to eat with your family.
Always a battle.
Or getting the kids to bed on time.
That's a negotiation marathon.
Even dealing with, a tricky coworker.
It's all about navigating those relationships.
And Voss gives us tools to do that. Like, one of the most common things, right? We need to ask for things.
A raise, a promotion, just a better deal on something.
And he's got some great tips. Like, how do you frame your request?
Okay, so it's not just about what you want.
It's about appealing to their needs, their interests.
So instead of saying, I deserve a raise because I work hard.
Which is all about you.
Right. You frame it as a solution to their problem.
Exactly. Let's say you want that raise. You could say, I've been thinking how I can help the team even more.
And with a salary increase, I can really focus on those goals that benefit the company.
Now you're talking their language. And don't forget those calibrated questions.
To figure out what they really care about.
You hit the nail on the head. Ask things like, what are your biggest challenges right now? What are your priorities?
It's like gathering intel before you go in.
You got it. And here's one that might surprise you. Use silence.
Silence? Really?
I know, it feels weird. But Voss is adamant about this. Silence can be powerful.
But why?
Right.
I don't get it.
It makes people uncomfortable. And that discomfort can actually lead to them making concessions.
Or spilling the beans.
Exactly. So you make your request, then be quiet, let them sweat a little.
That takes some guts, I gotta say.
It does, but it works. Okay, now let's talk conflict resolution.
Oh, that's a good one. We all deal with that.
Inevitable, right? But Voss's insights can help. He says, focus on their perspective.
Even if you think they're totally wrong.
Even then, it's not about agreeing, it's about understanding.
Okay, but how do you actually do that when you're, in the heat of the moment?
Tactical empathy. Mirroring, labeling, show them you get it.
That sounds like you're really frustrated.
I can see why you'd be upset. Those kinds of phrases.
Just acknowledging those feelings can de-escalate things.
And, crucial point, separate the person from the problem.
It's not personal. It's business, like they say.
Well, even in personal stuff, it applies. You're working together towards a solution.
We're on the same team.
Right. Use I statements.
Instead of you statements.
So instead of, you're always late, which is going to start a fight.
It sounds accusatory.
Try, I feel disrespected when you're late because it makes me feel like my time isn't valuable.
Oh, that's much better. You're focusing on how it makes you feel.
And that opens the door to actual resolution, that win-win Voss is always talking about.
Okay, before we wrap up, gotta hit that negotiation one sheet one more time.
It's a game changer, I tell you.
It is. It forces you to think strategically.
4 key parts: goals, analysis of counterpart, leverage, and calibrated questions.
So under goals, what are you trying to get out of this?
What's the ideal outcome? Then analyze the other person.
Who are they? What makes them tick?
Background, motivations, all that. Then leverage. What's the power dynamic?
What do they want? What do I have that they need?
And vice versa. Then those calibrated questions.
To guide the conversation, uncover those black swans.
It's your roadmap to success, and Voss has a great example in the book.
Everyone should check it out.
And remember, this isn't just for big business deals.
Any interaction, salary negotiation, even just a tough talk with your partner.
Make that one sheet. It'll help you see things clearer.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. This book, Never Split the Difference, it's really packed with useful information.
I'm so glad we did this deep dive.
I encourage everyone listening to pick up a copy, start using these techniques.
You'll be amazed at the difference it makes.
And remember, good negotiators are always learning and practicing.
Stay curious. Keep at it.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back next week with a brand new topic.
Until then, happy negotiating, everyone.